Hi, everybody, and welcome to this exclusive episode of Prinsights Global with my very good friend, Jim Rickards. Thank you so much for joining me here at the Rural Symposium 2025. We talked to Jim last year here. We've talked to him about his fabulous new best-selling book, Money GPT, which you can look up on our site. And again, we were on a panel yesterday. We covered so many things. You had incredible points as usual. And I want to get into all of them.
Sure.
Debt, the Fed, rates, gold. But maybe if you can tell us kind of your main overreaching thought right now, where we're at in terms of all of those things.
Right. Look, debt matters, deficits matter, and I don't, wouldn't disagree with any of that. But I'm hearing and seeing so much about. We have $38 trillion in debt. The debt to GDP ratio is at all-time high. The deficits, we were supposed to have this one big, beautiful bill to cut the deficits. The deficits are actually getting a little larger, at least in the short run. So, this then it's a very short leap from there to this is the end of the dollar. The end of the dollar is always a reserve currency, et cetera, and the Great Reset. So that's the narrative. Some of the facts are correct, and I agree with some of it, but I think the narrative goes completely off the rails. But let me explain why. I don't want to just say that. First of all, when you say $38, $39 trillion of debt, I'd be careful. It goes up a couple $1 million a minute.
Right. Right now, it's going up.
It's going up probably $1 million before we're done this interview. Yeah, it's a big number. But what does it mean? The way I explain that to people is, let's say you owe $50,000 on a MasterCard. Is that a lot of debt or not? Well, it depends on how much you make. If you make $20,000 and your interest rate is 28%, you're probably going broke. If you make $500,000, you just write a check and pay it off. In other words, the debt can only be considered large or small in relation to the resources, the income behind it. So with that very simple concept, I think everyone understands that. You do the same thing with the national debt, $38 trillion, yeah, big number. But what are the resources? Well, the resources is GDP, gross domestic product. And Nomi, you made the point that there are a lot of flaws in GDP measurement, and you're absolutely right. But it's kind of the best we have, and at least we have a good time series. So you have to compare the debt to the GDP. It's a ratio. Debt is the numerator, GDP is the denominator. What's that percentage? That percentage tells you if you're in trouble or not. So don't throw the big scary number at me without telling me what GDP is and what the ratio is. Now, the ratio is not good, let's be clear. It's about 123% right now, all-time high, but not too far from where we were in 1945 at the end of World War II. There was about 115%, but it's close enough. Although I do say it was 115%, but at least we won the war.
Right.
We got something for the money. But it's at an all-time high actually. So, but what does that mean in terms of the role of the dollar? The dollar is always reserve currency. The dollar is store value, et cetera. And there, I think the analysis goes badly wrong. Now, a couple of things. What Trump is trying to do, and I think very few people really understand it. I've had the privilege of talking to during the transition, and then since then, members of the administration.
You were on the team.
I was on the team. I was an advisor to the team. But put it this way, I spoke to transition team members. This is the way I would put it, including Peter Navarro and Kash Patel and others. They have a plan. It's the narrative you hear, again, I come back to the word narrative, but Wall Street loves narratives. They love a story. And if the story hangs together, everyone believes it. It's powerful. It doesn't mean it's right. And I'm kind of attacking the narrative a little bit. So the point is, the Trump plan, it seems chaotic. He says 500% tariffs on somebody. Then next day, well, it's only 100%. Well, then we're negotiating, could be 20, back to 100. And it seems chaotic, but it's all, it's kind of the art of the deal to some extent. But there is a coherent plan behind it. And what they're trying to do is lower that debt to GDP ratio. Now, can that be done? Well, we actually did it from 1945 to 1980. So it was a 35-year period. The debt to GDP ratio went from about 115% that I mentioned to 30%, which is very comfortable. That's like having the MasterCard but having a lot of money to pay it off. 30% was very comfortable. But during that period, that same 35-year period, the national debt quadrupled and the annual deficit quadrupled, but the debt to GDP ratio plunged from 115 approximately to 30. So again, it's not really about debt and deficits. It's about the ratio. we're not going to pay off the national debt. People say, we've got to pay off the national debt. Nonsense. Last time that was paid off was 1836 under Andrew Jackson. He actually did pay it off. That was the last time. We're not going to pay off the national debt. We don't have to. We just have to roll it over. We're not going to get rid of deficits. We don't have to. We just have to get them smaller in relation to the GDP. So it's all about that ratio. Now, the Trump administration has a plan to do that. If you can get the annual deficit at 3% of GDP or less, okay, you still have a deficit, you still have debt, but it's 3% of GDP or less. And then if you can get real growth at 3%, and I emphasize the word real because we have to tackle on inflation. Now, let's say inflation is 2%. So you really have to do 3 plus 2. I always promise to keep the math simple. So 3 plus 2 is 5% nominal growth. And everyone's like, oh, tell me about real growth. No, when you're dealing with debt, debt is nominal. I mean, I always translate things into real numbers. I think that's important. But if I owe you $1, I owe you $1. Whether it's worth more or less than it was 2 years ago, doesn't matter. I owe you $1. So when you're dealing in debt to GDP ratios, that's a nominal figure. So you take 3% real growth or higher, plus 2% inflation. So that's 5% nominal growth. So if the debt's growing at 3% and the GDP is growing at 5% nominal, what's happening to the ratio? It's going down. Mm-hmm. And that's all the market needs to see. The minute you go from 123 to 121 to 115, et cetera, if you're going down and B, on that path, the market will give you credit. They'll say, you're not going to 30% overnight. No, wait, it might take another 35 years. But the point is, it has been done before. It is doable, and that's what the Trump administration is trying to do. So for all those reasons, don't throw big, scary numbers at me. Tell me how it relates to income. Tell me what's going on with growth, which is a big part of it. Tell me what's happening to the ratio, and then I'll tell you if you're on the right path or not. And the Trump administration is trying to get on the right path.
It's really interesting because we did talk about this on the panel as well, and I absolutely agree. Growth is a necessary part of our domestic strategy, and it's a part of bringing that ratio down. So I want to just get your sense of where specifically that growth could come from. And also we're here at the Rural Symposium. To what extent does that connect into natural resources, industrial metals, gold, et cetera?
Well, compound question. I love those, and I'll answer.
I always do that.
I love them. They're. Let's look at where the growth is coming from first. If I can paraphrase the president, tariffs, baby, tariffs. They're going to do it with tariffs, and the globalists and the elitists and the economists, and the Financial Times and New York Times, all these Larry Summers, all these globalists who have basically empowered the communist Chinese and almost destroyed the U.S. economy. So you can't have tariffs. We need free trade. Free trade doesn't exist. Has never existed. Even David Ricardo, who was the father of comparative advantage theory, said there's a lot of flaws in this, and they are. The main flaw is that the inputs, the factors of production are mobile. So you and I could say, you're Britain, I'm Portugal, you grow wool, I grow grapes. I ought to buy woolens from you, and you ought to buy wine from me. Why are we trying to grow grapes in Britain? That's a comparative advantage. But it's also, it presupposes that those advantages are static. In the real world, they're not. So what was Taiwan's comparative advantage in semiconductors in 1978? Zero. Mm-hmm. They had comparative advantage in tuna fishing and rice farming. That was in tourism. That was about it. But they created a huge advantage in semiconductors out of thin air. Mm-hmm. The government just said, we're going to do it. And they put the resources behind it, created Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing. They had a very liberal policy. Like if you were a bright up-and-comer Taiwan semiconductor and you said, I want to start manufacturing, they said, go ahead. They would give you seed capital. They created a network. They brought in talent from California, et cetera. Now they are the leading, most advanced, fastest, best semiconductor producer in the world. My point is, they had the talent, they imported the capital, they had good government policy, and they created their own comparative advantage. So free trade is nonsense. It's what you do with policy, number one. Number two, this idea that tariffs stand in the way of free trade, well, that's a good thing. It's not new. The United States built itself on tariffs. We did not have an income tax until 1913. Well, how the heck did we finance the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, expansion in the West, creation of industry, the invention of the telephone, telegraph, electricity, airplanes, steam engine, coast-to-coast railroads, transcontinental railroads. How did we do all that with no income tax? Tariffs and excise taxes. That's how we did it. So, there's nothing new about it. There's a thread, and I'll talk about it. They'll be writing about this from George Washington to Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln was a big proponent of tariffs. William McKinley, all the way through Dwight Eisenhower up until the Trade Enhancement Act of 1962. It was all about tariffs. So so Trump is not doing something new or radical. He's going back to what used to be called the American system. And it's already working. You know, one of the biggest blunders recently, Volkswagen put a multi-billion-dollar plant in Mexico to build the Audi Q5 SUV, which is one of their most popular items, in reliance on what's now the USMCA, was NAFTA, but basically no tariffs between Mexico and the United States. But guess what? Trump's putting on tariffs. Now he's saying you can build anything you want, and sell anything you want to Americans free of tariffs, but do it here. Do it in the United States. So kind of in a roundabout way, the answer to your question, Naomi, is the investment is going to come from people jumping the tariff walls and putting their plants and investment and expansion in the United States. So that's number one. And you don't just get the investment, which is a part of GDP. You get high-paying jobs. And that's what America was always about. So Trump's not radical. He's actually going back to our roots and roots that were around for almost 200 years of tariffs and build it in America. Now, on natural resources, that's a great point and very, very powerful. $38 trillion in debt, yeah. But how about $200 trillion of resources that we haven't tapped into? This goes back to the 19th century. We can sell federal land. Now, you're going to sell the Grand Canyon? No, we're not going to sell the Grand Canyon. We're not going to sell Sequoia National Park. But the United States owns like somewhere between a third and a half of all the land west of the Mississippi. You can increase leasing for mining, gold, silver, uranium, lithium, rare earths, all the things we need. And then, obviously you charge rents or royalties for those leases, or, get royalty streams. There are a lot of ways to organize it economically. You can sell the land, or you can just, generate revenue from it. And Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has talked about this. He said, yeah, we got liabilities, but we're going to monetize the asset side of the balance sheet. So don't just look at the liabilities, look at the assets. What about the intellectual property that's bottled up in, the National Institutes of Health, the NASA, the military, et cetera, and government contractors where the U.S. owns the intellectual property? Well, subject to national security concerns, how about licensing some of that? So the ability to monetize assets, create growth, create investment, high-paying jobs is all there. All you have to do is abandon the globalist agenda, which only supported communism in China, and get back to America. And by the way, quick footnote, when I explain what I just explained to people, they go, oh, Jim, I hear you, it makes sense, but it's going to hurt Brazil, it's going to hurt China, it's going to hurt France. I said, too bad. That's their problem. It's up to, let Macron make France great again. Let President Xi make China great again. That's their job. Our job is to make America great again.
Now, what's interesting about you say, and I agree in terms of, like, your example of Taiwan was good because, you're talking about starting an industry effectively from nothing. And the point about industry isn't just having the materials, not just having the natural resources or the intellectual capacity, but building the processing capacity. And that's something we currently lack here to an extent. We only have one processing uranium plant for enrichment in the entire country right now. That's not good.
And we haven't built a new refinery since the late 70s.
So it makes sense that our growth is going to come from exactly what you're saying. And I think that Taiwan example is very powerful, because if you catalyze that processing in this country, you can bring in natural resources even from other countries, but you control the midstream.
Right, that's right.
You control the downstream. That's how you grow your economy.
It's not the end of trade. It's the end of stupid trade, meaning we don't charge any tariffs, but everybody else does. Why does that work for us? So let's have, Trump's talked about reciprocal tariffs. Some of the tariffs they look punitive superficially, like why is he throwing 40% on Vietnam? Everyone's like, Vietnam's a little poorer, struggling country. Well, maybe, but they're also a transshipment point for China. When we put tariffs on China, this goes back to 2018 in Trump's first term, China started shipping goods or semi-assembled goods to Vietnam, doing final assembly, shipping them to the United States under a very favorable tariff regime. It was a Chinese end run around the tariffs on China. And obviously everyone knows that. Peter Navarro knows that. He's the trade and manufacturing czar in the White House. He's the reason that we have a two-tier tariff system on Vietnam is 20% on their own stuff, but 40% on Chinese shipment. So that's smart policy. And by the way, it's not just about getting investment in the United States, although that's a big part of it. You also get revenue. You collect tens or hundreds of billions.
And that's how you grow.
Right. And sorry to interrupt, but by the way, I'll quote the New York Times, Washington Post crowd. They know nothing about economics, but they're saying, well, this one big beautiful bill is going to increase the deficits. It's not doing what they said it would do, et cetera. Those stories are based on Congressional Budget Office projections. The Congressional Budget Office has never been right, not even close. And go back and look at 20 years of Congressional Budget Office projections, 5 to 10 years forward. Show me one that was even close. Doesn't exist. So first of all, that's garbage. And it's not that they're dumb. They don't have computers. It's the case that their models are badly flawed because they assume static behavior. And what I mean by that is you change the law, they assume everything else stays the same, and then compute how much tax revenue or deficit you're going to have based on the change in the law with no change in behavior. That's nonsense. Behavior changes immediately. And they don't even count tariffs. So they're projecting budget deficits without counting tariffs, and we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars coming in from tariffs. So the CBO is garbage for the reasons I mentioned. The revenue projection is going to be much higher. The deficit is going to be much smaller, and you get on that path I talked about earlier.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense, and things shift all the time. And let me shift to final area as our time kind of starts to end. And I know you're a very busy person, and I so appreciate
I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
Conversations and everything that you do. We also talked about gold and sort of the idea of as things are shifting in the world, what's gold's position. You had some really interesting projections based on your analysis as to where gold could go and how quickly it could get there. And I wonder if you could give some thoughts on that. And also to investors who are maybe just a little bit in gold or not in gold yet, have they missed the boat or what's going to happen there?
Great question. A couple of things. I'll go back to my favorite word, narrative, which are get powerful but usually wrong. But the narrative today is, it's the end of the dollar's losing its role as reserve currency. I don't agree with that at all. I can explain why that's not happening. But then I say to people, one of my favorite jazz songs from the Montreux Jazz Festival in 1968 is Compared to What was the name of the song. When people say, is the dollar going up or down? I say, compared to what? If you're comparing it to the euro, right now it's going down. It's probably going to stay down. That's not a sign of weakness in the dollar. It's really important for investors to understand. This is being engineered by the U.S. Treasury. This is part of Steve Moran's Mar-a-Lago Accord. You got to, go back a little bit, do your homework on what's actually going on in the White House. This is engineered. This is not that different from the petrodollar in 74 and the Plaza Accord in 85. So those are your precedent. Both of them devalued the dollar. So this is being engineered by the Treasury. So don't expect the dollar to go up. It does not mean the end of the world, the end of the role of the dollar as a reserve currency. My question is this: has it gone down against the euro? Yeah. So what? If you think the dollar's role as a store of value is in decline or about to collapse, what are you going to do? Say, hey, give me some euros, give me some yen. Do you really want German and Italian bonds and Japanese government bonds in a world where the dollar is collapsing? No, not at all. Because they're all, I call them, they're all survivors in the lifeboat. They're going to sink or swim together. It's not like one's going down, the others are not. They're all joined to the hip. So what is the alternative? If for whatever reason you want to diversify out of dollars, and I think that's always a good thing, you go to gold. And one quick footnote on that, there's been so much talk about the BRICS currency. The BRICS are going to have a new currency. It's going to be the end of the dollar again. More nonsense. The BRICS may have a currency in 10 or 15 years. We'll see. They're doing a lot of other things right, but launching a currency is not one of them. But they don't have to. They already have one. It's gold.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is gold is very much in demand. The central banks are buying it as fast as they can. I like the trade because with central bank buying, it kind of puts a floor under it. No guarantees, but it puts a floor under it. So I call it an asymmetric trade. You don't have much downside because the central banks are buyers, but you own all the upside. So that's a good position to be in. And one last thing, it's a very strong gold market. It's going to get stronger. I see gold at $4,000 an ounce before the end of this year. and going up from there. But we are not at the retail frenzy stage, which I lived through in January 1980. I mean, I worked at Citibank at the time. They had a mandatory lunch hour. They did. And as I used to walk up Lexington Avenue, maybe shop at Bloomingdale's back in the day, and I never did it once without seeing gold chain snatching. It would be like some woman would scream, you turn around, there's a guy, grab the chain around. That's how crazy people were about gold. We're not there yet. I'm not in favor of chain snatchings, but we may get to that mentality. But here's why. And again, very simple math. So let's say gold goes up $1,000 an ounce. Well, if you own 100 ounces, you just made $100,000. But to go from $3,000 to $4,000 is a 33% gain. To go from $9,000 to $10,000 is only an 11% gain. It's the same $1,000. You made the same $100,000 on your 100 ounces, but it gets easier as you go along. So people, this again, you gotta like have a little behavioral psychology behind this. People are like, oh, I made $1,000, another $1,000, another $1,000. But yes, that's the nominal amount, the dollar amount. But the percentage just keeps dropping because the denominator, the base, is larger, and it gets easier. So all of a sudden, you go, oh my goodness, 10, 11, 12, and that's what happens. That's the frenzy stage. If you have gold, I recommend 10% of your investable assets. Don't bet your home equity or your business, but whatever else you have, those are your investable assets. I recommend a 10% allocation. If you're not there, keep buying. If you don't have any, you have not missed the boat. This thing is just getting started.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I know that percentage allocation because I've known you for a long time. Jim and I have been friends for quite a number of years. That allocation suggestion has actually increased. So you're basically increasing as that percentage is moving up.
I think, no, I've stayed pretty much with the 10%. I do say, season to taste.
Right.
If you have less risk appetite, 5%, that'll serve you well. And 20%, I don't recommend 50%. I know people with 50% in gold. I think that's a little high. But yeah, knock yourself out. But to me, 10%, I guess the reason I settle on 10% is if I'm right about my projections, and I believe I am, you're going to make a lot of money. If I'm wrong, it's not the end of the world. In other words, a 10% allocation that goes down 20% is a 2% hickey on the overall portfolio. You can live with that.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for everything. And everyone here watching, thank you to the audience here, Prinsights Global, and the broader audience who I know is a fan of all of Jim's immense body of work. Jim, thank you so much for joining us here at Prinsights Global.
Thanks, Naomi.